dun. Oh, no, I did it wrong. Hello. Hi, everyone. It's Maude. I have COVID. Oh, no. Please bear with me. Welcome to Maude's Book Club. As you know, we love to cover a book every single month. And when we've got cool books, we like to do 2 books. Speaking of 2 books, this is the book right behind me. It is Gundog by the Gary Whitta. Now, if you've been on Twitch, you know Gary. He's the one usually swearing up a storm in a bunch of different streams, playing a bunch of different games. But if you like movies, you'll know him as the screenwriter for great movies such as The Book of Eli with Denzel Washington. He did Rogue One, a Star Wars story as well for all the Star Wars nerds. He's written for your favorite comic books with DC and Marvel. He's worked on The Walking Dead. This guy knows what he's talking about. Oh, Zelda knows what he's talking about. And he's written his 2nd book. It is all sci-fi, and we're going to have a big chat about it today. I would love to welcome to the stream Mr. Gary Whitta. Hello, Gary.
Hi, I honestly feel a little bit bad dragging you, like, not necessarily out of bed, but like making you do this when you just came down with COVID. Like, how are you feeling?
I honestly, I've done this to myself. I have been boasting the last couple of days because it was Monday that I tested positive, and I felt a little bit sick over the weekend, so I stayed inside all day. And everyone's like, how bad is it? Because the last 2 times I've had COVID, I was bedridden for 2 weeks. It was no joke. And this one, I was like, I've got a mild cold. I'm totally fine.
I wonder if you're becoming more resistant to it now because you've had it a few times.
Maybe it's a different strain. But yeah, I woke up this morning and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. So that'll show me for underestimating myself and underestimating what this is. But don't even worry about it. I've read this book.
I do worry about it. I know what I'm like. All I need is a little sniffle, and I'm canceling everything. So
yeah,
I know. for keeping this on the calendar.
No, I'm dedicated to this, and I actually finished it today because I wanted it fresh in my mind. Yeah. To talk about it with you. Now, if you're a part of Maude's Book Club's Patreon, you actually get to submit questions. And I've got a bunch of questions from the audience that I want to get stuck into straight out the gate. And then I want to talk about your first book, this book, what you've done differently with this book. There's a lot to chat about. So let's get stuck in straight away. More of the general questions. We've got Will P. From Maude's Book Club, who has asked, can you describe your writing process? Now, I believe because you've written so many different things on so many different platforms, how much different is it to map out an entire book?
It's my process is different with not just with every project, but also certainly between the different kinds of projects, because I primarily film and television writer, a screenwriter, and that's a very specific discipline. If you've ever read a screenplay or even just paged through it, you know they're written in a very, very specific way. They're not really written to be read by an audience. They're written to be read by filmmakers who are going to use that as the blueprint to make a film. You still have to tell a story and keep people interested and keep them wanting to turn the pages, because the first job of a screenplay is kind of to sell itself, right? People have got to read it and think, oh, this is a good story. So the rules of good storytelling and characterization and plot and structure and all that stuff basically still apply. But in execution, the difference between writing a screenplay and writing a novel is night and day, completely different. And obviously with different pros and cons. So back in 2015, when I wrote my first book, it was partly because I just wanted to try something different. It was also because I just knew that if I tried to write my first book as a screenplay, no one would make the movie, because it's just kind of gnarly medieval body horror thing that I didn't expect Hollywood to want to make that. So I wrote it as a book instead, and it found an audience, and I was really pleased by that. But more than anything, I kind of taught myself, because I'm very autodidactic. I taught myself to write screenplays. I taught myself to write a novel. I don't really read books about how to do things, because I just don't process information well that way. I don't do well in structured learning environments. I hated school. Sit me behind a desk and someone's going to stand at the front of the room and teach me things. It all goes in one ear and out the other. I learn by doing. Oh, that didn't work. Let's not do that again. Learning from my mistakes. And I honestly, obviously I've read many books over the years. I've been a voracious reader of books, specifically sci-fi and fantasy, ever since I was a kid. But I never really thought a lot about what went into making one until I thought, well, let's try writing this story as a book. And I'll tell you, it sounds embarrassing, but it's true. I literally Googled how many words are there in a novel, typically, because I honestly didn't know.
How many are there?
Do you know? It's well, I can tell you that anything under 50, 60,000, you probably don't have, that's going to be a really thin book unless you blow up the text really, really big. But obviously like I'll give you an example. My first book was 125,000 words. My second book, the one we're talking about today, was about 80,000. So like tens of thousands of words difference in length between the two. One is shorter than the other, and it was designed that way. And of course, the answer is really a book is as long as or as short as it needs to be, right? If you have a massive, epic, long story to tell, then by all means write a massive, epic, long book. You don't have quite the same strictures that you do in screenwriting, where, if your screenplay is much longer than 120 pages, because the way it works in screenwriting is a page of properly structured screenplay roughly will come out as about a minute of film time. So 120-page script will roughly give you a 2-hour movie. And so if you turn in like a 150, 180-page screenplay, someone's going to look at it and go, "Oh my God, this is a 3-hour movie. Yeah, we have to cut this down." But a book, can go look at any book on it. Go to your local bookstore. They're all shapes and sizes and all different thicknesses. And so that was my first kind of liberating thing, was to realize, well, I don't have to worry about like, how do I have to fit this in a certain length, or I could just let it be as long as it was. And so Abomination, my first book, was actually pretty long. Again, short by some authors' standards who write like big, thick doorstep books. But the first one was like 125, and this next one's like closer to 80. So again, it's the first thing I learned was like the story is as long as it needs to be. And then in terms of like actual process, whether I'm screenwriting or writing novels, I go back and forth depending on how I'm kind of feeling the material. But I think I am generally a bit more of a seat of your pants type person. My process has changed a lot over the years. When I was a young writer, like literally in my teens, and I was first experimenting with creative writing, like, what you're like back then, you're very young and impatient and just want to get on with it. You don't want to read any books or like learn how to do it. Like you just want to, how like when you take like your first guitar lesson and you're not even picking up the guitar yet. So I want to get into it. No, you have to learn to do all these things first. I just wanted to get into the writing, and I didn't want to outline. I didn't want to plot out the story. I wanted to just start writing. And so I did that. And of course, what you learn, again, going back to learning from your mistakes, what I learned very quickly is if you write without any plan at all, any sense of like where your story is going, you will wind up in weird, uncharted territory and write yourself into cul-de-sacs and dead ends that you can't get out of because you didn't think it through. There's got to be I'm not like an intricate plotter. My books and my movies as well tend not to be like very intricately plotted. They're fairly simple from a story mechanics perspective, but you at least need to have a rough sense of like a beginning, a middle, and an end, I think. And so when I first wrote the Book of Eli, I didn't write like a long outline. It was literally just like what we call a beat sheet, one page of like, here are the major story beats in the movie. And that was just, as long as I have like a central spine, I kind of know where I'm going so I don't get lost. That gives me enough to write with. And I generally tend to avoid, unless I'm contractually obliged to, when I write for movie studios, which I sometimes am, try to avoid writing really long, detailed outlines and treatments, because that part's it's not the actual writing, right? You're writing a document about what you want to write. And that's not that fun for me. And what I have discovered over the years is that all of my best moments of discovery, all my best kind of aha, eureka type, oh, that's a good idea, I should do that. Those things tend to happen when I'm like actually in the page writing the thing. I don't know why. My brain doesn't fully engage until I'm actually writing. When I'm writing an outline or a treatment, I'm kind of one step removed from the actual writing, and I feel like I'm not fully like in full gear. And it's only when I start writing. So for that reason, I started increasingly kind of bypassing the outlining process, and I would just do again, never do none, because you'll get stuck every time. But like I've learned enough about myself and my own process to be able to spend as little time as possible outlining, as little as possible, like just enough to get me started, and then I'll figure out the rest.
I believe it's called pantsing. That's the seat of your pants method. You pants it, and you just kind of stream of consciousness, get it all out, and like, your fingers typing away kind of take you on the journey. It's so interesting going from 120 pages to 120,000 words. I think the big thing is understanding that you have full control over everything, instead of sort of like submitting to the director for them to take the vision for it. You also get something that screenplay and movies never get, and that is inner monologue. subtext, all of the unsaid things, you get to say it at your whim in these books. How was that, finally being able to flesh out inner dialogues and thoughts and nuance in that particular way?
Yeah, I can tell that I'm like talking to a proper book club person here, because you're hitting like all the right. These are literally all the things that I kind of discovered along the way when I wrote my first book, and then rediscovered when I wrote my second. It was like I wanted to. I was like, I want to try something different. Like let's see, like it's almost kind of like learning a new language, because it's so different to write in prose rather than again just the very kind of stilted writing that often makes up a screenplay. When you talk about words, like a screenplay might only be like 4,000 or 5,000 words, like not even that, because there's very few words on the page. If you look at a screenplay, it's very bare. So to go from like 5,000 words to 125,000 words, just by volume, I'm writing a lot more. But I really enjoyed that. And yeah, you're right. A couple of things like internal monologue, like it's really nice. You never want to, like, again, with any story, you don't want it to get like bogged down and like with these kind of pointless, meandering detours. But you do have much more luxury with the way that a book is paced to get inside the characters' heads, and hear their thoughts, in a way that you might not otherwise, and do a little detour and just like sit with the characters for a moment in a way that in a movie might be really boring or hard to present. So I really enjoyed discovering that. And I think with my first book, I maybe got a little bit carried away. There's a lot of kind of internal monologuing and kind of backstory chapters, like the Abomination, which is set during or right after the Viking invasions of England in the 10th century. Like the first 50 pages are just basically this really nerdy kind of potted history of the Viking War.
Exposition! You get to do it now instead of a flashback scene.
Before we even get into like the monsters and the magic and all the crazy stuff, it was just this kind of, nerdy historical interlude. But then the other thing, the main thing, and I guess I had a sense of this, but it didn't really occur to me until it happened, was like, you're right. Like when I write a screenplay, again, like I said earlier, it's not for the reader. It's not for a reader. It's for a director and for actors and producers and executives who are going to, consider it to, are we going to spend money making this movie? Does an actor want to play a part in this movie? It's really more of a sales tool than anything else. So I always say, like, it's not the actual house. It's just the blueprint for the house that the architects are going to use to build the actual thing that people will then go to a movie theater and see. But when you're writing a book, that is the actual house, right? That is the finish. When you're done, other than a little bit of editing and like actually printing and publishing the book, the creative work is done, right? There's no one that really comes after you. And that really, so when I did my first book, they put me with they assigned me an editor, and she was really nice and she was super smart because it was my first book. It needed a fair amount of editing, and she gave me a whole bunch of notes. I remember getting the Word document back that had all the kind of the red little flags on it, all the comments in the sidebars, and it was like a massacre. It was like red. I was like, oh my god, there's so much red. I was skimming through, going, oh my god, there's so many notes. But they were all really, really, really smart. It was like, and it was mostly little. There wasn't anything structural, like you need to chuck out this whole section and start over. It was just like, this sentence might read better if you structured it this way, or you might want to consider using another word here because you used it already like 2 pages ago. And it's things that you don't necessarily notice when you're writing. And they were all really, really smart notes. I would say like less than 5% were notes that I in any way kind of bumped up against. And a couple of times I went back to the editor. I'll never forget this. I tell this story almost every time I get interviewed about writing books, coming from a screenwriter's background where I'm constantly basically just trying not to get fired. Right?
Yeah.
The unspoken context in which you are given notes when you're working for a movie studio, even if it's something that you created, like when I created the Book of Eli, but once I sell it to Warner Brothers, they own it. And they can fire me as soon as whenever they want. And so when I'm getting notes from Warner Brothers, they are kind of presented. No one will ever say this out loud, but every writer knows that the unspoken subtext is, do these notes to our satisfaction, or we will find someone else who will, right? And writers get replaced and kicked off movies all the time. Every screenwriter, I don't care who they are, can tell you a story about that happening. And it's so strange to think about that when you realize how unique that is in the creative world. Like, for example, let's imagine Stephen King turned in his latest book to his publisher, and the publisher said, Stephen, we love this book. We're not that thrilled about the third act. What if this happened in the third act instead of that? And Stephen King said, no, I don't want to do it that way. I like it this way. Okay, great. Well, we're going to fire you and bring in another writer to rewrite the third act of your book. Like, you're shaking your head. It's preposterous, right?
Yeah.
But that is completely normal in Hollywood. That happens all the time. The word authority is, of course, derived from being the author of something. But in Hollywood, you have no you have no real authority as the original author of the work. And when I did my notes with my editor, and I was kind of afraid, well, what's going to happen if I push back on some of these notes? I went to my editor and said, I love most of these notes. I've got like 3 here that I just don't agree with. And like, I understand where you're coming from, but like, I just want to do it my way.
Yeah.
So what happens now? And she was like, do it your way then. Like, these notes are just suggestions. It's your book. I'm here to help you. But if you don't agree with any of my notes, ignore them and chuck them out. And I was like, it was like the scales were lifted. It's like the heavens open. I was like, oh my God, really? That's amazing. I don't get fired. I can actually write this story the way that I want to write it. And that was remarkable. And the only downside of it is because movie making is so collaborative, and every movie that I've worked on, I've always been like nowhere near the smartest person. I'm always surrounded by people far smarter than me. And that is comforting, right? Because if you pitch a bad idea or have a bad instinct, there are smarter people around you to kind of check your math and say, maybe don't do it that way. What if we did it this way? And you go, oh yeah, of course, that's much better. What was I thinking? But when you write a book, you do have the editor as well. And most of the time they're doing the same thing. Maybe consider doing it this way. And I go, oh yeah, much better. And I'll change it. Thanks, editor. But every now and again, when I do put my foot down and say, no, I'm convinced that I'm right here. She's like, I've edited 500 books. Well, I'm writing this one and I'm going to have it my way. And that's all very good until the moment they commit to printing it. And you start to think, shit, what if I was wrong? Like, what if I did get it wrong? Like, there's no safety net.
Right.
In almost every movie that I've worked on, if there's something in it that you didn't like or did like, I can never really take all of the credit or all of the blame, because I'm just one small part of the storytelling process. But with Abomination and with Gundog, it's all me, right? If there's something in Gundog that you didn't like, I can't point the finger at anyone else. It's my fault. If there's something you did like, then I'll happily take the credit, but I also have to take all of the blame. So ultimately, that's a net positive for me. I like the full responsibility. I like having authority over the finished story. It's nice to be able to present something and just say, this is all me, right? No one else got in the middle. There's no one else between me and my audience. There's an editor, but again, I can choose not to do their notes. And so when people do like the book, it's that much more satisfying, because you feel like you have ownership of their whatever satisfaction they're getting. So that was me. I did that. So yeah.
I've got so many questions that have spun from this, but the analogy like that you've just made with that, the only way I can relate to that is the difference between an actor and a host. Because an actor is being a character. So if you don't like the character, then you get to have that disassociation, being like, well, I'm playing a role. But as a host, everything and every word that I say, that comes out of Maude's mouth. So I have complete ownership over that particular thing that I do as a host, which again, is great when I nail it. It's shocking when I say something that gets me in trouble. I need to do a little housekeeping, because we got follows, raids. Raiko raided.
We got a big raid from Raiko.
Raiko raided a little bit ago, and I didn't want to interrupt your flow at all, because you were crushing your answer about your writing process, which Will is in the comments saying, oh my gosh, I do that, same. But Raiko was saying, Gary's here. So thank you so much for that. He was playing Lies of P, which is a brand new game. I'm so interested to hear a little bit more about it. Then KP Dubs gifted 5 subs to the likes of Raptorial Bird, 0 and 9, Quappy, Manolin, and Feminine Fig. Then Vaden came in and gifted 10 subs to the community. So Captain NJP, Pumpkin Cakes, J Rod from Spokane. I don't know why that's so funny. Hi, J Rod from Spokane.
Wait, what's funny? Spokane? What's funny about that?
Just like, I'm J Rod from Spokane. It's all in the username.
Oh, okay.
I just think that's really quite funny. Melanie SP.
He's really proud of Spokane.
Yeah.
I love it there.
JP from Spokane. It says everything. Some people love to be anonymous, but not J Rod from Spokane. Alphidius, Unacceptable Losses, Mark Prime, Latsuki, and Dravit, and Sangria Goldfish, and then Catch22 gifted 22 subs, as he does monthly, which is amazing. In this instance, and because I have COVID and I've got a guest, I will not read out all 22 names. But if you got gifted a sub, thanks to Catch22, make sure you say thank you in the comments, because we're a nice community around here. A lot of people weighing in. We've got a lot of comments about the writing process and how it all works. It's one of my favorite questions, because every writer has usually such a different process with how they do it. Some are meticulous with planning things out. Every single chapter has beats, and that's how mapped out it is. Other people don't even know the ending when they start writing. Super interesting. STS2884 asks, any genre that you haven't gotten to write for yet that you want to. Because Abomination's sort of fantasy / horror. Gundog is sci-fi. I feel like you've got your nerd quota happening big time there. But is there a genre?
It's weird. I tend to kind of accidentally stumble into genres that I have no intention initially of writing in. Like I'll write something and think it is a certain thing, but it's not until I get it in front of readers who are, because the thing is, like, you're always like the least able to kind of critique your own work, right? Because you're too close to
You're
it.
in it.
You're looking at it from the inside. The way that I always think about it is, you know how like when you hear your own voice back on tape, it's like, oh my God, is that what I really sound like? That's how everybody hears you, right? That's what you sound like to everyone else. But your own voice to you sounds different because it's coming from inside your own head, right? And that affects the acoustics of how you hear it. I kind of feel like it's that with writing, right? The way that I perceive my writing, only I perceive it that way.
Yeah.
Because I created it, it came out of me. There's no way I can ever like step away from it and have objectivity. And so it's not until I put something in front of other readers sometimes that I actually understand or realize what it is that I've written. And that can be really surprising. When I wrote Abomination, I initially thought of it as just this really cool kind of gory fantasy. I didn't think of it as a horror piece because I don't think it's particularly scary. It's just really, really gory. A lot of people getting their arms and legs ripped off and stuff like that. Because I just wanted to do like an old-fashioned monster movie. But not necessarily one that's terrifying, but like one that's kind of like almost like an old-fashioned like Roger Corman type monster movie. So not necessarily scary, but definitely kind of gnarly. I always described my first book as gnarly. And when it went to the publisher, they went, oh yeah, we're going to send this out to like horror book clubs and get like horror influencers. Like, wait, horror? And they go, oh yeah, are you not aware that you wrote a horror book? I'm like, I mean, I guess I am now. So again, it happened like completely by accident. I'll give you another example. This actually happened really recently. I can't talk about what it is, but I wrote something recently. Actually, Maude, you do know what it is because I think you may have looked at it a little bit. So we're not allowed to talk about it. But so that was a thing where I wrote it and I thought I was writing this really dark, twisted drama. And when I gave it to one of my first trusted readers, she came back and said, oh, it's really funny.
It's funny.
Like, wait, is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
It wasn't intended to be. But what was interesting, I was in the middle of writing it. It was like it was a TV thing, and I had written a couple of episodes. But I got back from the initial readers, oh, we really like the fact that it's funny and the comedy. So I started, oh shit, like I don't think of myself as a comedy writer, but I accidentally stumbled into writing a comedy.
A dark comedy.
Once my own work was explained back to me as what it actually was, or at least how it was being perceived, I was like, oh, okay.
So you're genre fluid.
Let's go with that. I'm very genre fluid. I'm genre curious.
I like that.
I'm omni generic, and it's funny. It goes back to that question about process. Like I was able to pivot with that project that I had shared with you, and to take it further into. I went back and like retroactively changed some stuff to make it tonally consistent. But like what was interesting about that was I said earlier, like always at least have an outline. With this most recent thing, I didn't at all. I just was really kind of besotted with this idea. I wanted to explore this character, and that one really, really was making it up as I went. Like I literally would start each episode having no idea where it would go, and I was like, I'm just going to I'm going to pretend that these characters are real to me, that they're real people. I'm going to let them tell me what they want to happen, and then I'm just going to write it.
So it's like method writing.
Yeah, it was really weird. I've never written anything that way before, and I was fully prepared for it again to like write it off of a cliff and like, well, that didn't work. Back to square one. Let's outline it this time. And yet it was this really, really weird fluke. I don't think it'll ever happen again. Where like even though I did the least amount of plotting and the least amount of structuring and outlining, I just fell ass backwards into like it came out really, really well, and I just ended up. Remember I said earlier I do all my best discovery on the page. I think because I went straight to the page, I was able to get straight into that process and connect with the characters and just feel it in a way that I hadn't before. I think you can over outline. I think you can write like an 80-page outline, and every beat and every twist and every reveal and every moment is in there, right? In detail. But then for me, when the time comes to write it, all the fun's been taken. I've done all the fun stuff, all the discovery, all the creative, all the storytelling. And now I'm just kind of like basically adapting that treatment into like a novel or a screenplay. But
well, you're almost chained. You're confined by your structure.
Yeah. I mean, you can change it. And that's why like when when I do screenwriting, people say, well, we're gonna hire you to write a treatment first. Like that's a necessary step. And I say, I'll write you a treatment, but just be aware that like I'm probably gonna throw it out after you've read it, like because that's just not how I work. And so it's a constantly moving target, which I find delightful. The fact that like I can find myself like switching genres. It's like like the frogs in Jurassic Park that just spontaneously change sex because they need to, right? Life finds a way. I kind of feel like creativity finds a way as well. And I keep falling backwards. I fell backwards into horror. I wrote a horror book without realizing it. I wrote a comedy TV show without realizing it. I don't know. It's like, this is why I'm so, when I speak at conventions and seminars and things about writing, I always tell people, don't get bogged down in rules. Don't go read a million books about how to write or how to write a screenplay. Like there are some good ones out there, and there are definitely universal storytelling basics that it's good to know. But at the end of the day, what you need to figure out is what works for you, because it's different for everybody. You can talk to 10 of your favorite authors, or 10 of the most popular, successful, however you want to quantify authors in the world, and they will all tell you something different about how they approach their work.
I like that.
So trying to replicate someone else's process is not going to work. You just have to find your own.
It's essentially, it's the trust the process, but it's like trust yourself in getting it the way you need to, because our brains are all different and work in wonderful ways. I've got a question here from Vaden. We're getting straight into the book. We're talking Gundog now.
Good. Can I just say, it's actually such a thrill now for me, now that the book, because I've been living with this for a long time. You know, these things gestate for a long time. And we did the audio version last year, which was the story's first exposure to the world, and that was great. But it's actually my favorite time in the process now is to get it out in the world and now start to hear what other people think of the story, and to be able to react to them and do this kind of book club stuff. So, I'm glad you picked up on that. Let's talk about it. This is like a really fun part of the process for me. Okay,
well, let's get through them. We've got a bunch of questions here. First off, Vaden asks, what inspired the name Gundog?
I always had. I just thought it sounded cool. It just sounded like a cool word. And it's funny, over the year, it was originally called A Boy and His Robot, like back in 2009 when I first started playing around with it, and before the lead character was a woman. Originally it was a young boy, and I wanted to come. I knew I wanted to do something with mechs, and I like all the military jargon and all that bullshit, like, you know, Top Gun, or like, I love all of that stuff.
I got Top Gun from this a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit Last Starfighter. There's a bunch of that kind of stuff in there. There's two people in the cockpit, right? And so I got a little bit nerdy about figuring out, like, if the military had really built, because the idea is like the mech in the story is essentially this kind of Air Force prototype that they built years ago to fight off this alien invasion, and it didn't work, and it's been sitting in a hangar ever since. But it was built by the Air Force, and the U.S. Air Force. And so, okay, well, what would they call it? What would it look like? And so, I came up with the M151 Gundog armored combat biped, or ACB. It just sounded cool, but I was thinking about, like, I was looking at other military vehicles. You think about like the A-10 Warthog, right, and the F-14 Tomcat, and the F-15 Eagle, and the F-18 Hornet, right? They're all named after, you know, cool creatures. And so the idea,
I didn't put that together for me.
It was like my version of Tomcat. You know, it was kind of it's based a little bit because, you know, like an F-14 Tomcat, a Gundog has a pilot and a Rio, right? Someone who's behind them. And when in a Tomcat, it's the guy's called the radio intercept officer, who's basically the navigator who picks out targets and stuff. In Gundog, it's more a little bit like the Last Starfighter. Essentially, there's a pilot who drives the thing, and then there's a gunner who shoots at things. And it's, from a storytelling perspective, it's nice to do that because you can have two characters talking to each other, right? There's a third character in the cockpit as well, but it's nice to be able to have interaction between two people in a cockpit and not just one person alone. But yeah, it was very. I think it originally came from, like, I always loved the name, the F-14 Tomcat. I grew up on Top Gun like everyone else, and I remember thinking, like, what's this? If it's the F-14 Tomcat, this is the M151 what?
Yeah.
If it's not a Warthog, it's not a Tomcat, what is it? And we came up with Gundog. And also there's accidental. Some people ask, is it meant to evoke Gundam? You know, which is of course one of the greater, you know, Japanese mecha
with the kaijus.
Yeah. So I was trying to. This whole book is kind of a tribute to the Japanese mecha subculture and wanting to do like a very Americanized version of it. And so that was actually kind of kind of accidental, but yeah, it ended up being a title that I just, sometimes you pick titles because you just like them, you know, you just like the word.
I feel like there's two types of people. The people that know that reference and they get like the Tomcat sort of side of things.
Right.
And then the me's of the world that are waiting for these electronic dogs to start shooting. And I was like, okay.
I know. And
I've seen the Black Mirror episodes of like the robots that are like.
And for a while, SEO was a nightmare because, you know, before this book came out, you get a lot of like things about hunting dog. Like a gun dog is actually a dog that when you go hunting, it will go like, you know, scare up targets for you, like ducks for you to shoot at or whatever. That's that's what a gun dog actually is. I know it sounded kind of militaristic and cool. And you know, again, when it's introduced for the first time, it's introduced as the M151 gun dog. So you're supposed to kind of get the F-14 Tomcat kind of association.
And it's so funny. I played F-19. I don't know. It was like on the MS-DOS machine. I don't know if you reviewed it back in your PC editing days, but that's like, I grew up on those things. Still didn't click for me because I was just so ready for dogs to be electronic and weaponized.
Right.
But that's why I'm glad we have the clarification for that one.
And it's so funny to clear it up for you
because the mech is in the title.
Yes.
You have to make the book so big to be able to see these details. But when you see the mech there, you're like, oh, great. And immediately I'm put into Titanfall. So my next question is, how much sci-fi research did you have to do here? Are you playing Titanfalls? Are you looking into sort of like future scenarios that are likely for the human race?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's really kind of like pop culture historical research. Again, it kind of bugged me that ultimately you just want to write the things that you want to read and see, right? And so I've always wanted more. Like mechs are so cool, right? They're so cool. Like, why don't we have more of them? They're so popular in Japan and in Asian culture, Asian popular culture, in manga, anime. Why don't we have them here? Like when I say I want to do something with a mech, people go, oh, like Robot Jocks, which is a movie from like almost 50 years ago, like from the 80s. Or sometimes people will reference Pacific Rim, which is kind of more of a kaiju movie, but technically they are mech. So I was thinking about like, what is the actual like dictionary definition of a mech? And if it's a giant armored weapon that walks around on legs and is piloted by, you know, a human operator, that's a mech. So like Transformers aren't mechs, right? They're robots, right? Because they're fully autonomous. And so there's a very specific kind of subset of like boxes you have to check to say, oh yeah, this is a mech. And I was looking, I played Titanfall 1 back in the day, and I remember when I was researching this, I went back and looked at some of the Titan designs. Titans are much smaller than Gundogs. In the book, they're described as like 60 feet tall and they weigh 600 tons. They're big. They're like they're not as big as a Jaeger, which is like, I don't know, like 600 feet tall. They're massive. But I wanted something that felt like truly big. And I had to do a lot of like, I literally had to do a lot of weird stuff. Like, well, how big is 60 feet tall? Right. And like, what is
say 18 meters, was it?
Yeah. It's I'm terms of like, what does it look like in real terms? But yeah, roughly 3 feet to a meter. And so what does it look like? It's about 10 humans high, basically. Right. And so, you know, I did little kind of miniature, like kind of drawings, like scale models. Okay, here's how big a person would be next to something that is 60 feet tall. And if it's 60 feet tall, can it really weigh 600 tons, or is that too heavy? And I had to do all of this kind of stuff because if I don't get it right, I guarantee you I'm going to hear from readers who are going to tell me that I didn't get it right. So, and then how fast can they move? There's a lot of navigation. They move specifically from like one place to another, like, and people know how many miles that is. So like, how fast is it moving? What's its top speed? Like all of that stuff kind of has to make sense. I don't think that's necessary for the story, but when you deal with science fiction, there's always going to be a subset of super nerds who will go get their maps out and tell us, well, you said it was moving at 30 miles an hour and it covered this much terrain in these many days. Trust me, I worked on Star Wars. I know what it's like hearing from like nerds who don't think that you've done it correctly. So try to make it as realistic as possible in terms of the technical details, even though we're dealing with stuff that's completely made up. But all I really care about is like, do the characters feel real and does the story feel real to you? The technical details are kind of secondary.
But it's funny because like when it's your book, you're responsible for it. But I feel like if it's in a script, it's like that's the art department, or like, you know, that's someone else's problem. You know, you don't have to get bogged down by the science as much behind these things, I'm guessing.
Yeah. When I worked on Star Wars, I had the luxury, like our office was literally right next door to the ILM art department they had put right next to us. So when we said like, okay, let's do something, like it was like, we created a new ship for Rogue One called the U-Wing, which is a troop carrier. but I didn't know what it looked like. We just knew that it was going to, like, in the same way that the X-wings and Y-wings are called that because they vaguely look like a letter an X and a letter Y. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, let's do a U-wing, and so it's vaguely going to look like a letter U, I guess. But like beyond that, I had no idea. And then you go next door to ILM, and they've created it. Oh my god, it looks a million times better than anything I could have come up with.
Wow.
And with Gundog, so I had like a very, very vague idea in my head of what it looked like, and I had reference for other mechs, but like it's specifically not described to like in like hyper detail in the book, because I kind of feel like when you read a book, it looks like what you think it looks like, right?
Yeah.
And so rather than say no, it looks exactly like this and exactly like that. I mean, there are certain things that are, it has 2 arms and 2 legs, and it has kind of narrow torso and a big barrel body and things like that. But I want to try when you're writing a book. When you're watching a movie, that thing is designed and shown to you, right? There's nothing left to the imagination. You know exactly what it looks like. I think there's a more fun opportunity when you write a book to like describe it to you, like this is a giant 60-foot tall, mech, and give them a few details. But in my experience, the reader's always going to decide for themselves what it looks like.
They'll piece it together.
So don't tell them they're wrong. Basically, let them have it imagine it their way. And then when I finally had some concept art done for the audio version that we did last year, I gave the artist some specs, and again, even I didn't say, well, it's kind of like this big, and it has big guns for arms and stuff like that. And then when I got the art back for the first time, I was like, oh, that's what it looks like. In the same way that people would tell me like, oh, you've written a horror book or a comedy show without realizing it. The artist came back and said, here's what your Gundog looks like. Like,
this is what you brought to life. Yeah.
But way better than I could have drawn it. So yeah, it's cool.
Another question here from Will P. Did you always know that you wanted to include passages written from the perspective of the mech, or was that something that you added in later to provide additional information to the reader? To which I would like to tack onto that. Did you want to, like, because this was quite a linear story progression, knowing where both sort of pieces are on the map, providing an extra layer of tension, knowing that they're sort of like on the trail. Is that?
Yeah, no, it's again a really, really good question, because it's something I had to figure out as how to execute this in the writing. It was decided early on. I decided early on that the bad guys in this movie, the mech, are essentially a machine. They're an alien race, but they're a machine race, right? They're completely automated. Like, who made them or where they come from, we don't know. But essentially, it's like if Skynet came from another planet, right? They're drones, they're machines. They don't really talk or emote. They're not characters in a sense. They're just these bad things, like zombies, essentially. And if you're doing a story where you're being pursued, if you think about like, The Fugitive or something like that, typically you're or the Terminator, typically you are going to cut back to the bad guy that's doing the pursuing. So, because you never want to lose that sense of urgency, right? You always want to be reminded, oh yeah, there's someone's chasing them. They've got to keep moving because someone's right behind them. It was difficult. And you can do that in a movie with the Terminator, right? Because the Terminator doesn't emote. Like, you don't want to have a conversation with the Terminator, but just seeing him like go from place to place and show up, oh yeah, he's still looking for them. He's right on their trail, one step behind them. And that's how you keep the urgency going. In a book, it was tricky because I had these bad guys that essentially are Terminators, right? So I can't do a scene with a bunch of mechs standing around going like, where do you think they went? Like, that's just not, you can't treat them like they're humans. And so, but I had to have that sense of urgency. You can't just be, I kind of feel like the mech might be on our trail. It's got to be more specific than that. I wanted to be able to check in with them and demonstrate that they always were being pursued, because our heroes in the book, they escape from a alien prison camp, and then the aliens send trackers and hunters to track them down and recover them. I had to find a way to demonstrate that, to illustrate that, show that, so that people would get that sense of urgency. And so what I came up with was the idea of these little dispatches that were, the commander that is sent, the Tommy Lee Jones essentially, that is sent to bring back Harrison Ford, is anytime he goes to a location and like picks up their trail or checks in somewhere, sends back a little dispatch. And so to Central Command, and I just wrote them in. So I wrote those, and in the audio version, it's done by Troy Baker.
I didn't even know it was him. You kept saying Troy's on it, and I'm like, when am I going to hear him? Not even realizing that.
He's the Met commander. And so like they had to be distinct from the other because like Shannon, I didn't want Shannon to do those sections, right? Because it wouldn't sound right. And so Troy came in and played the Met commander in the audio version. And for the book, they're done in a very different typeface. The whole book is written in a specific kind of serif typeface. And then when we typeset the book, it's like these sections need to look like a computer printout. Like they need to look and feel very alien and different. And I can do some of that. I can write it in such a way that the language feels very stilted and formal. It's not conversational. It's kind of like, a bureaucrat writing a report. It's very, 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 very Spartan. And it's kind of scary in that way, right? Because you're being right. Oh, these are machines. But there was a really, really good question, because it was a problem that I had to solve. As soon as I like the idea that the mech were these alien robots, but well, then how do you do scenes with them? And so there aren't really. If we ever made a movie, it's something we would have to solve as well, because that would be presented differently. There's only a couple of scenes where the heroes actually like meet the bad guys and actually interact with them. For the most part, it's really just these little interludes, and also it's a nice way to break up the story. Like I've got there's a very small story. There's only a handful of speaking characters in the whole thing. Every now and again, it's nice to just like pull away and do something very different. And also, there's nice ways to insert story into that. For example, if the mech figures something out and then send the information back to base. I did it a few times. So, that's something our heroes don't know. Like they don't know that the mech know that, and that's kind of cool.
Is Falk still alive? Yeah.
Is Falk still alive? Where do they think they are? Are they still looking for them?
What's going on with Sam? Is Sam being interrogated?
Yeah, is he being tortured? Yeah, that stuff's really cool.
Something that I really liked at the start, especially with post-apocalyptic, takeovers, invasions,
conquests.
I thought it was really interesting that it was put out there, the exposition. Look, we had a peaceful sort of mech alien race coming down that were going to share resources and provide. This is spoiler territory, by the way. If you haven't read the book, we're going pretty spoilery, but this is the start of the book, and I'm kind of setting up the premise here. But if you don't want anything spoiled for you, I apologize. Get out.
But this is a big spoiler. I'd love to talk about it, but just be aware this is a big spoiler.
It is a big spoiler.
Read the book yet? Again, you're picking up on all the things that. This is actually my favorite interview that I've done about the book, because you're the only person that actually, I think, genuinely read it and paid attention.
Well, my big thing here is, as a reader, I thought it was really interesting, and I kind of want to pick your brain on how you see things, because you made it very believable that humans are shit, and that we deserved what.
That's not a stretch, right, to get you to believe that.
No,
we live in the world. But yeah, so this is an idea that I always had from the beginning, and it comes back to this idea of like, what do you want your story to be about? Like thematically, what is it about? Like, what do you want to say? Like, what question do you want to pose, or what statement do you want to make? And on a human level, on a story level, the story is really just about a girl who is reunited with her mother, who she thought was dead, right? And that's the emotional core of the story, and someone who kind of learns to kind of stand up and rise up against bullies, essentially. But then on a broad, like, what's the broader idea? And the idea was, we live in an age of propaganda and fake news and post-truth and deep fakes, and no one knows what's real anymore, right? And it's been established, for hundreds of years that this is the best way to control people and subdue them and have them do what you want them to do is to convince them to believe what you want them to believe. And so the book begins and ends with these footnotes, with these passages written directly by Dakota, the hero of the story, and they both start with the words, "Here's what I know," and she kind of lays out the way that she sees the world at the beginning of the story, and then she does it again at the very end, and she lays out the world the way she sees it now, and it's fundamentally changed, right? Because she's seen the truth. And so the idea is that after the mech, so essentially the mech came to Earth like, I think it's 30 years ago.
30.
Because they fought a war that lasted for 10 years, and then it's 20 years post after that. So, and also there's little clues like, why did they kill off everyone over a certain age? Again, you realize there's a reason for all of that. That they came, it was a classic kind of Independence Day. They just showed up and started a war and started invading us, and we fought back, and in the end it wasn't enough, and they conquered the world and put us all in prison camps and like killed everyone over the age of 20. And what you realize by the end, and we all now live in prison camps, and what we realize is that everyone was raised to believe that the war was their fault, right? A whole generation of people have grown up being told by the mech and by their elders that this was that humans caused it, that the mech showed up. We come in peace. Let's do a peaceful exchange. We need water and things because our homeworld's dying, and we'll give you incredible technology and medicine and science, and like this can be great. We can all live in peace. Like first contact. But humans in their infinite greed essentially decide, well, we can just take it, right? These guys don't seem like they have any weapons. Like, they're not a warlike race. Why don't we just take what we want? Which again has been obviously a facet of human history, right? Whether it be the conquest of North America by the conquistadors and the British and everyone, Columbus. Like, nice planet, we'll take it. Like, we'll just have that because we're stronger than you. And it's a kind of stain on human history, like so many times throughout. And Dakota talks about this. And so the idea is that the Met could probably keep us under control anyway, but it would be harder if we hated them and thought that they had taken our world away from us. But by convincing us that it was our fault and they came here offering us everything and we decided to try and destroy them instead,
it takes the fight out of them.
And now we're being punished essentially for our own sins. No one has any will to fight, right? Because they just feel like they've kind of made their own bed, now they've got to lie in it. And a big part of what Dakota is doing is trying to show people what really happened, so it'll inspire them to stand up and fight. And I think that again, that's the closest thing that the story has to kind of like a moral or a social or a political theme. And again, I think it's pretty timely these days. Again, in the age of Trump and alternative facts, and the election was rigged and all this kind of nonsense, and people believe what they get told to believe.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like when I was writing, is this a stretch? Like, could we have a whole generation of people that have grown up believing that their history was something when the reality was something else? And I haven't had a single person complain about it, because again, we live in sadly, the world provided the context for that to seem really believable.
And the fact that knowing history has repeated itself over the years, and every single flaw basically that the world has done, you can trace it back to greed being the motivator behind it. So it made absolute sense to me. But it was so interesting, again, we're going spoilers here, when you do find out the truth and you start rooting for humankind. So I actually want to know from you, what do you wish the biggest takeaway is that people have after reading this book?
I think mostly just hope that they have a good time reading it. It's not a book that's going to win sci-fi awards or anything. It's not meant to be like a prestige-y kind of book. I really just wanted to like indulge my love of big giant robots kicking the shit out of aliens and just have fun with it, and just have it be an old-fashioned like popcorn adventure. And it's like I mentioned before, it's a short book, right? It's way shorter than my previous book. And you'll notice that even though it's a shorter book, I think it has more chapters than the previous book, because I deliberately, I don't know if you noticed this, but I deliberately wrote them in very, very short chapters. Like, some of the chapters are only a few pages long. And the idea was, like, if you keep hitting, I don't know if this works or not, it's kind of a trick, but like, if you keep hitting chapter breaks, it feels like the story's moving quickly, right? It's, we're on the next chapter, we're on the next chapter, we're on the next chapter. If it just gives the story the sense of propulsion, which doesn't replace like the actual propulsion of the story needs to keep moving. There's always something happening, but by breaking it down into lots of little short chapters, all apart from the last chapter, which is just one epic battle, and then it's meant to kind of feel like breathless, like, oh man, when am I going to get a break? This book usually gives me a break. No, not this time. You have to go through the whole battle. It just felt like structurally a way to make the story feel fast. And
it actually feels like time, like a minute goes by, and like when you're being chased, time is so crucial, and you kind of feel that through reading.
And time is completely relative, right? It's like if you're sitting waiting for a bus, time goes by really quickly. If you're playing like a video game that you love, it's like, oh shit, 6 o'clock already. Like, time goes by more quickly or more slowly depending on how you perceive it. But that's also one of my favorite comments that I've got back now the book is out there in the world, is like, and when I first saw it, I was like, should I be happy about this? But I am. It's like people saying like, I read it in one sitting, or I read it over the weekend, or I read the whole thing on a flight, which, it makes me like, is there enough there? Like, are people done with it? When you're done with it, are you going to feel like you got your $25 worth or whatever? But I think it's less about length and more about like how much you enjoy the time you spend with the book. And I think the fact that people are reading it or essentially binging it, right, all in one go, is hopefully testament to the fact that it is propulsive and it is structured in a way. I just wanted to do like an old-fashioned page turner, and I think it does that at least.
It does. I agree with that. I've got a couple of interesting questions here from readers. Since this is from Vaden, since the mech are conquerors, are we going to meet any of the other enslaved species in sequels? And I guess it spawns a conversation about sequels, because this is a hella setup.
Yeah, the whole story. I mean, the whole thing, when you think about it, is really just set up for the next one, right? Theoretically, because by the time they get to the industry, you realize that they have more. There's not just one Gundog. There's like a lot of them.
You got an army.
But at the same time, the mech are now sending reinforcements from their home world. The idea is like, if this was the first battle, in whatever the next chapter would be, another book or whatever, now it's the war. Right now, it's going to be a full-fledged war for the planet. And it would be far larger in scale. I was always thinking about like Alien versus Aliens, right? Like one alien, very tight, very confined, versus Aliens, which is just like all out, war against some, legions of aliens. That it would be far greater in scale. But I couldn't really get into it too much by virtue of the fact that everything's told through the lens of these characters that just don't know much about the world, right? They only know what they've been like. Most people in this world can't even read, right? Because they've been completely severed from their own knowledge and history. They don't know, like when they cross the border into South Dakota, they literally don't know what that means. Like, what is South Dakota? Because no one's taught them that. And so they've got
what's Mount Rushmore?
Right, Mount Rushmore. They just call it the Four Faces, right? Because they don't know what it is. And so they're totally disconnected from their own history. They don't know who the mech are. They know the mech came from another planet. They don't know anything about them other than that. I think there's a conversation where Dakota says to Falk at one point, like, do you think they've done this on other worlds? Like, and eventually you realize that they have. I think Rosie, when they meet Rosie, she says like, yeah, they're a conqueror species. This is what they do. They they'll attack a planet, strip mine it until there's nothing left, and then move on. So yeah, I think there probably are lots of other worlds out there that have gone through the same thing with the mech. But I deliberately, one of the reasons why I wanted to do like robot, like aliens that don't really emote or say very much, is I just think that like the Terminator is scary, right? Because remember that speech, it can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop until you are dead. Like, that idea is terrifying, right? This thing that just keeps coming and doesn't have any human emotions or weaknesses that you can use to your advantage. It's just a machine that is designed to kill you and do nothing else.
Well, that's a huge trope, isn't it? A trope is to try and use compassion, you try to humanize them. Don't you remember you were a kid once? What would other people think of the young you? And so you're right. When you dehumanize and when it's like you've got that sense of detachment and compassion won't work, and it's just all out warfare.
I just kind of feel like something's more scary when you don't know much about it, right? When it's mysterious. And so if we knew everything about the mech and what their homeworld was called and where they came from and what they do and how they think and who somebody presumably created them, right? Because they're not an organic race. To me, especially if you think like, well, this could be a bigger story, and if there's never any more, then that's fine. Like, it ends in a way that suggests there's more to come. But like, they won, like, they blew up the Death Star, right? They blew up the Death Star in the first one, and if there's never any more, like if they had never made another movie after the first Star Wars, if Star Wars had been a flop, it still would have felt like a complete story, right? They kind of beat the Empire, and then when Star Wars was a massive hit, they were like, oh shit, no, you didn't beat the Empire. There's still lots more of it because we now need to go make more movies. So in success, there is more story to tell. Originally, and this is one thing that I really talked myself down off quickly. In my head, there's 3 parts to the story, and each one's bigger than the last. And I wrote originally when I wrote the book, I wrote Gundog, part 1 of the Liberation trilogy. Oh. And I was like, no, don't do that, because like that's what happens. Because then I remember when they did Aragon. And
yes,
Aragon the movie.
Yes,
and it was like in part 1 of the Dragon Balls trilogy or whatever it was. But there was never another part. It felt really presumptive and arrogant to say, well, obviously this is just part 1, right? Because there's going to be lots more. No, you never assume that,
right?
And so I really wanted it to feel like a standalone story, though. If there isn't ever any more, you don't feel like you were left like, well, what happens next? What happens next? It's nice that people are. I mean, I deliberately left Falk out there a little bit as like a hanging thread, like what happened to him. If I never resolve it, it's not. I don't think it's the end of the world. But like, if the book is successful, we would get to go back and answer all of these questions.
Is that why you didn't let him smooch?
I just, I don't know. Girls are icky, and
I literally have merch that is let them smooch.
I'm terrible at love scenes, which is weird because this thing that I just wrote has loads of sex in it. But like, I don't know. Like, I always kind of feel like, and there's no love scene in Rogue One, right? And we got praised for that, right? People said, like, I'm glad that I just feel like if you've got a man and a woman, or 2 characters, right, who could well be romantically attracted to one another, I just don't feel
Runyon
like
is pining. He's pining over her.
I know. I feel bad for him.
Poor Runyon.
Well, okay, if you want to get really deep, I'd
Let's
say
go.
this is where probably the most personal. I've never said this to anyone before. So Runyon, who's the guy that is replaced, again, so let's talk about it, right? So Falk, who you think is going to be the guy, right? He's the beefcake. He's the smart one. He's the one that you want to be with. We kill him off, right? I really wanted to pull the rug out from the audience at one point and like have the audience be mad at me. Like, I'm going to kill a character that you really like.
Yeah.
But it's meant to like hopefully bring home like this is not fun, right? This is a harsh world and people are going to die. And none of these characters have plot armor just because they're a major character in the story. And so we killed off the kind of the hunky guy and replaced him with like the nerdy guy that Dakota doesn't really want to be with at part. Just simply, and it's nothing wrong. It's not his fault, but he's just not the other guy, right? And I'll tell you something. And until I met my wife, I was the other guy my entire life. And so I was always like, oh, I really like this girl, but like she prefers this other guy. And there was always a Falk and I was always Runyon. So I related to Runyon a lot, like kind of the nerdy kid that just couldn't get girls to be interested in him because it was always like a better option. And so there might have been a little bit of wishful fulfillment, like, well, now I get to kill the other guy. Right?
Yeah. And Runyon's really smart and he's got a huge growth and development and he's actually a much better guy if you had the chance to get to know him.
And it's a better love story. I mean, the Falk one, you kind of like, he's all that, right? He's a little bit of a Mary Sue. Like he's good looking, he's smart, he's confident. Dakota likes him right away. There's an attraction there right away. And then when we take it, I'm looking at the chat, when I said I killed him off, when I took him out of the story, presumed dead, and he may be. I think the Runyon story is the better story because she has further to go with him, right? In terms of like, I don't like you to begin with because again, it's not your fault, but you're not who I was supposed to finish this journey with, right? It was supposed to be the other guy, and so he starts like 20 yards back to begin with, and ends the fact that he ends up kind of earning her trust and her respect, and they get to the point where they almost kind of, I just think it's always more interesting, especially when it comes to that will they won't you like romantic stuff. I just think it's always more interesting when like you get right there but you don't quite do it. And again, especially if you want to do more storytelling, like don't blow all of your your ideas right away. But no, I don't know, for the most part, unless it's really important to the story, I've never felt like a romantic subplot or love scenes or romantic chemistry between two characters is something you got to have that, right? Well, you got to add that on, even if it doesn't feel like it's organic to the story. No, if it isn't. I never felt like it was appropriate for them to do that.
Right.
And so, because they're, as you're going to they're both she's very guarded.
Also, her mum's now there. Her mum's there.
Yeah, plus the mother's like constantly, you don't even know when she's in the room, right?
She sees everything.
She sees everything, right? Because she's a hologram and she's plugged into like every system. And so, yeah, she's going to hear you even when you're whispering. She's going to see everything. It's like, what are you doing? Get your hands off.
Yeah.
Get your hands off each other.
And she still has like
watching
the mother side of her as well, which I think is a beautiful juxtaposition. I'd love to talk about Rosie. I know we're running out of time. I've still got like 10 questions, but
I know I talk too much. I'm sorry.
No, but I think the concept of sort of like being able to upload your brain to become an AI entity. So it's you and it's how you thought and it's all your memories, but you're no longer a sort of a corporeal person. You are in the ether or whatever it's called. As a parent, is this something that you would do, knowing that your memories would live forever and your essence could continue to father your children even when you had passed?
I think it's a really freaky thing to think about, and it wasn't something I wasn't thinking about this as in the conversation when I was first writing it, because when I first started writing this years ago, AI wasn't what it is now. Right. And but now it's very much part of the conversation, and it's stuff we've seen it in Black Mirror.
Yeah,
you'll see it. And I just recently saw my friend Gareth's new movie, The Creator. It's all about kind of war against AI, and a lot of like, well, at what point does AI just become life? Like, and that thing has as much right to exist as you do. One of the greatest Star Trek episodes of all time, Measure of a Man, did this with Data. Right? Are you alive? Are you real? Do you have the right to exist, or are you just a machine? And with Rosie, the idea was I wanted Dakota to be reunited with her mother, even though she is definitively dead. And the way to do that was to have her kind of preserved as this, kind of AI consciousness. And if you ask, I try to make this very clear in the book, like that's not a copy of her. That's not, like a mimic or whatever, like in every way that matters. It is absolutely her, because every single part of her is preserved. Like they mapped every part of her brain. You know, and your brain is just electrical and chemical activity, right? There's no, I think we'll get to a point where that can be like replicated, and like we'll have to take the word artificial out of intelligence. It'll just be non-organic intelligence, right? But it won't be artificial anymore.
Yeah.
It will be real, and these machines will think and feel and be capable of the same emotional reactions, you know, joy and sorrow and anger and fear and all the things that we have. And that's Rosie, right? It's captured every part of her memory. Her soul is basically there. So she really is talking to her mother. The only difference is there's no physical body.
You can't get a hug. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the biggest test for that is when the scene when like you think she's died and she's just that box, and Dakota's trying to get her to come back. Is like, is that gonna, I was worried, like, is that gonna work? Like the audience has to believe that she's real as well, right? That she's not just a box for you to feel the sadness in that moment. So it's very kind of, you know, high risk, high reward stuff. But no, it was just a fun idea to play with. And again, with the holographic stuff, it's just Rose is actually my favorite character in the book. I really like her a lot because I love how she kind of modulates back and forth between the mother, you know, I'll tuck you in, sweetie, and they're like, on your feet, soldier, because she's also like her commanding officer, right? She's her boss. She's a superior. So it's just really, really fun to play around with like different versions of her.
I know, like going, hey, I wasn't in your life the last sort of like however many years, decade plus. And I'm the one that can conserve sort of like your early memories and tell you about that. And I want to be your mother in this moment, but this is a life and death situation.
Yeah, and she's a very different character because she's the only one that's like a remnant of the old world, right? She's the only one who remembers like the post-war world. I didn't put it in the book because it wouldn't work in a book format, but I always imagined that in like the TV or the film version, like the Rosie's like constantly playing like all her old records in the cockpit, like all of her like favorite disco records and stuff that none of these kids have ever heard before, right? Because they have no concept of music or whatever.
But then it also heightens her responsibility, where it's like this needed to happen, and she was chosen over everyone else to have this happen to her, and now she's single-handedly responsible for all of Earth's history.
I mean, yeah, there's something powerful about the idea of something being the last one, right? I mean, this is very, very much similar to the Last Starfighter. Like the Last Starfighter was advanced prototype. If we lose this one, that's it. Same thing with Gundog. If we lose this one, that's it. You know, Denzel carrying the last Bible. If you lose this one, that's it. So you have very, very high stakes, right? Because everything rests on this. And I think a couple of times Rosie kind of reminds the characters and by extension the audience, the reader, if this doesn't work, there's no one else, right? This is all on us. And that, you know, that's how you get to high stakes.
I also liked with the book writing tropes, usually if it's like a chosen one, which in this instance, it kind of delves into the chosen one storytelling. But usually with that, you'll have the prophet or the sage or the mentor in the beginning, and then that person will die. You know, Obi-Wan with Star Wars, you know, so you'll get a little taste that there's a much bigger world than what you've known, and then they're gone, and then they're set on their own for the rest of it. You did that in reverse, which I really loved. And I think
that's so interesting because I never even thought about it that way. Honestly, you're my favorite person I've spoken to about this book because I feel like you really like thought about it. And my favorite thing is when people come back to me with their thoughts on the book and it's stuff like, oh shit, I never thought about that, but that's cool. And I'm going to take credit for that now. Thank you very much. It's really good.
Well, I liked it as well because it actually doubles down with the whole post-apocalyptic storytelling, which is you have to have a glimmer of hope for the story to stay alive. When everything is desolate, when there's nothing left and you need hope as the fuel. I thought it was really interesting that the then sage and information and that sort of trope, which is usually at the beginning, it was almost a reward at the end, which then became the hope. And you also were able to say, well, it's not a given. You know, I can take it away as well.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I worried a little bit when I was the way that I wanted the book to set the tone for like, this world is really grim and like the world is broken, right? It needs to be fixed. The world needs a hero. But the first couple of chapters are just basically people essentially living in like futuristic Auschwitz. Like it's horrible, right? They're being incinerated and it's the worst. They're basically human slaves. It's the worst. And it's really, really grim. The first couple of chapters of the book are really grim. And the idea was meant to be the first half of the book is meant to be kind of hard. And then when she actually gets in the cockpit, then it's like payback time and you can start having fun. But it takes a while to get there. And so it's like there had to be something early in the story, like I said, that first you can't wait too long for like the first glimmer of hope. And so for me, the first scene is when Falk shows up. Shows up, the map on his arm, right? It's like, I need you to come with me. It's like, oh shit, there's something here. As soon as there's a thread to start pulling on, you can start getting engaged in it. But it has to come early, I think, structurally, which is why I think it's like either at the end of chapter 2 or only in the short chapters. End of chapter 2, beginning of chapter 3, there's like the story really, okay, we've set the tone. You understand the world is terrible. Everyone's miserable, but here comes this guy with a map on his arm.
You did a really great job as well with Sam, where Sam was supposed to be the protector, the older brother. He was supposed to be in charge, and like having the masculine, feminine energies.
I lost you. You muted.
Oh, I did. I got so excited. I gesticulated into my microphone and muted myself.
I do that as well. This has a capacitive mute button on it, and I brush against it all the time.
And of course, Trisha Hershberger's rating. Hello, Trisha. We will gonna wrap it up. Maybe I can get a few more of my questions out now. Yay! For those that are just
can't leave 496 people hanging.
I know. For those that are just joining, a big hello. I'm Maude from Maude's Book Club, and we're actually chatting to Gary Whitta, who is an amazing screenwriter. He's written Rogue One, a Star Wars story. He's done The Book of Eli, and now he's got a sci-fi book called Gundog, which we've just been talking about in a no spoiler kind of plot.
Well, it's very, very spoilery.
But to not spoil it for now, Gundog, actually, I'll get you to do it.
Now we have to go back to non-spoiler territory.
That's it.
There's a bunch of people in here that I would like to sell a book to, and I don't want to spoil it for them.
Well, I mean, I should get you to do it then. Can you tell us about what Gundog is in a spoiler-free
sense? So
I,
as a Twitch streamer myself, I know this is good streamer etiquette, right? When you get a big raid, introduce yourself so people know who you are. Gundog, which yes, I do have one here.
I've got 2 if you need one.
You've got here's another one here. It just came out last week. I'm really proud of it. It's kind of an old-fashioned kind of science fiction story about a young woman who grows up in post-apocalyptic world 20 years after it's been taken over and conquered by aliens, a machine race known as the Mech, and everyone's basically grown up as a enslaved by this population of aliens that have conquered the world. Until one day she realizes that she might be the heir to the last of what is called a Gundog, which is basically these extremely high-tech mechs that the U.S. military built as a way to try and fight the aliens up, but it didn't work. But they have this advanced prototype. Essentially, it's about a girl who gets to strap herself into a 60-foot tall, 600-ton war mech and fight off an alien invasion. So it's just very, like I said to you earlier, it's not going to win any awards, but it's really fun. It's a page turner. People seem to be really enjoying it. It's just, you can read it like in one long sitting. I've had people tell me they read the whole thing in one day or a weekend or on a flight. It's, if you like kind of ass kicking militaristic sci-fi, if you like The Last Starfighter, if you like Rogue One, if you like Top Gun, it's very much all of those things.
Trisha actually just saying she was re-listening to the first episode, which is available. I mean, you can listen to them on your Twitch, which is twitch.tv/ is it Gary Whitta or G Whitta?
Gary Whitta, yeah.
Gary
or you can
Whitta.
just go to any people. It's so funny. A number of people saying, "Is there an audio book?" I did this in a weird way where I self-produced the audio book adaptation myself, and that actually came out first. It came out last year. So if you prefer to listen to your books rather than sit and read them, Shannon Woodward from HBO's Westworld and Troy Baker from The Last of Us did an incredible job narrating 9 hours of audio, which is all available for free. We never charged a penny for it on pretty much every podcast service. You can go to realm.fm, you can go to Spotify, Apple Music, Audible. They all have it, and it's all free. So you can listen to the whole thing for free. Mm-hmm. And that's Gundog. But then if you actually prefer to kind of sit and read a book in the old-fashioned way, either as on paper or as an ebook, then that is available now at Amazon and all places where books are sold.
Also, I really want to talk about the fact that you got Austin Wintory, who you've known for a little while, to do an amazing score for it. Now, I didn't know that he actually pretty much had like a score for a big portion of this book, but you ended up bookending it to start and to end the episodic sort of way that you did it with your podcast episodes. It was really well done, though. That was so fun.
Yeah, when we did the original Twitch live broadcast, which we kind of did like an old-fashioned live radio show and everyone could listen to it together. Austin wrote these for the waiting room, when the stream countdown is starting. Austin wrote these overtures, these 9 different overtures, and each one was different, and each one reflected the tone of what was going to come in the episode. In the podcast version, you don't hear any of that. You hear like you hear like the theme music. It's only like 20 seconds or whatever because you want to get into the story. But Austin's nuts. Like I've been a fan of Austin's work for many years. He wrote the soundtrack for Journey, which is my all-time favorite video game soundtrack, one of my all-time favorite games. I asked him to do this thinking he might write me like a 60-second intro, like front and back, like opening and closing credits. He went away and wrote like an hour of original
Wow.
music and put together like a full orchestra. Wouldn't take a penny of my money. I didn't try terribly hard to pay him, to be honest, but when I did try, he rebuffed me. And put and that is now like you can go get that on that's also on Apple Music and all the places. There's like a full digital soundtrack album that Austin put out.
Wow.
If you just like to listen to it, and that's amazing as well.
Will-
Like as audiobooks go, we ended up kind of going like way above and beyond.
Yeah. Also, Will is asking in the chat, what led you to release your book as a 9-part audio series instead of the more traditional route?
I was during the pandemic, I was toying with the idea of like just doing something all by myself. And as a writer in Hollywood, I get tired of people pulling the rug out from under me at the last minute, because I've worked on many movies that got canceled or I've been fired off the movie. And I write in this constant state of anxiety where I am worried that all the work's going to be for nothing because I'm going to be fired or the movie's going to get canceled. I've been through all these heartbreaks before. And I thought, well, if I keep this small, if I just self-publish a book and self-produce an audio version, and I don't have to ask for anyone else's money or permission, no one can pull the rug out from under me because I own the rug, right? It's my rug.
Yeah.
And so I never have to worry about it's just going to find an audience. And I'm fortunate enough to have enough of a following from Star Wars and Eli and Kind of Funny and my time on PC Gamer and Walking Dead and Batman and other things that I've done, that I've got, add them all up, I think got like a couple of 100,000 followers on social media. So if I say, hey, I've made something new, when I go check it out, I know that at least some people will go look. So I know I can put a story in front of an audience. And so the original plan was to self-publish the book. And I thought, well, I have to do the audio version as well, because audio is a huge part of the marketplace. Like something like 1 in every 3 books that get sold are people who listen to books.
Wow.
So if you want to self-publish a book, you can't leave those people out, right? And so I thought, it's audio. How hard can it be? Well, it turns out like to do anything well, it is really hard to do good audio. But I'm very fortunate through my time working in Hollywood, and I know a lot of cool people. I'm very fortunate in that regard. And so I got Shannon and Troy to do the voices. Shannon did 9 hours of audio in the studio. I could never afford to pay her. She's like way out of my like pay range for like actually hiring her as an actor. But she did it as a favor for a friend, and I'll always be grateful to her.
She crushed it as well. She's
so good.
Yeah,
she's so incredibly good, and Troy's incredible as well. And so we put it, and the idea was to do it as a like I didn't want to just dump it all as an audio book. The idea originally was to do these kind of live Twitch broadcasts where each episode, each week, almost like a season of television, I would appear much as I do now. And say, oh, thanks for coming. Here's tonight's episode. And everyone could listen to it together in live chat and respond in real time as the story was happening. And then I would come back at the end and do like a little Q&A author discussion thing. And it was like, just felt like a different way to debut a new piece of material. And like, what would happen? Like no one's done this before. And it was really popular. And then we put it out as a podcast, and that ended up being spectacular, like genuinely like crazy successful. Like we were in both in sci-fi and like overall fiction categories. We were like the top 3 podcast in like 20 different countries around the world for like all 9 weeks that we were putting out new episodes. It was amazing. And then the plan was then for me to self-publish the book just through Amazon Kindle, like right after, like literally as the last episode. And now the book's available for people that have been waiting to read it. But the podcast was so successful that a publisher got in touch with me and said, hey, would you like us to like put this out? We can do like a really nice hardcover and actually get you in Barnes and Noble and, bookstores. Oh, that actually does sound kind of cool. I still have full creative control, right? They still can't take the book away from me.
There's a lot of fear here, isn't there? Like I would love to unpack that.
I've worked in, you ever go to like a dog shelter and there's that one dog, it's like, oh, that poor bastard, like has been kicked around his whole life, like kind of cowering in the corner. That's what screenwriters are like. Because we've been kicked around the whole, and constantly like waiting for the other shoe to drop. What's the worst could happen? And so I just really, really want to try to recalibrate the way that I do my original work in a way that lessens the chance of that happening. And so again, the key is if you never have to ask for anyone else's money or permission, you can go around the gatekeepers, go to YouTube, go to Apple Podcasts, go to Amazon Kindle. You can find an audience. Wool, right? Hugh Howey's Wool, which went on to become Silo, biggest hit in the history of Apple TV. He self-published that book. Andy Weir, who you of course know from
for The Martian. He was putting up paragraphs, and it got
just
so much
on his dinky little website.
Yeah.
50 Shades of Grey, of course, started off as Twilight fan fiction and went on to become like a mega blockbuster. So you can do it that way. And I fully planned to do it until the publisher came in, but in order for them to publish it, like they can't just like chuck it out there in a week. Like it took a while for them to design the book and the whole thing, and do distribution deals and get it in front of retailers and stuff. So it actually ended up being like almost a year. The podcast version debuted almost a year ago, and it's only now that the actual book is out. So it's been really interesting this past week. A lot of people saying to me, "Oh, where's the audio? How much is the audiobook version?" I'm like, actually, that's free. Like it's been out for a while. You can go listen to it right now. It's just chopped up into 9 pieces, but you can listen to the whole thing back to back.
You won't say it, so I will. Support Gary and buy the book.
Yes, please do. I don't like telling you you can get it free. You can, because some people only will only do audio, right? But for those, and for those people, that version is there, and it's tremendous. And I can say that because what makes it tremendous is not me, but like Shannon and Troy and Austin really, and Adam Nickerson, who did all the technical production behind the scenes. They made it good. I just gave them like the raw material to turn into something good. But with the book, it is all me, and I do get to be very proud of it. And it's the only way that this thing's ever going to make any money, right? Because the audio version, I didn't make a penny. A couple of bucks from like advertising that went on certain versions of the podcast, but like I ain't quitting my day job over it. And I very much doubt the book will make much money either, but I really don't care. I make my money doing the Hollywood bullshit, except not right now because I'm on strike. But my day job is film and television. So when I do something as a book or a comic or whatever it might be, like that to me is just, I don't do it to make money. I do it because it's the only way that I can like get original stories in front of an audience and try different things that typically I would not be able to get through, the typical kind of Hollywood machine.
So I've got 2 last questions. I know we've gone so far over, but we've also got all of Trisha's Dragon Riders in here as well. One of them is going to be super, super quick, and one of them is going to tack on to what you've just said. But the one I really quickly wanted to go through, I believe it was Jay Buntrock who said it. I thought it was a really funny question. One sec, sorry, I have a document here. Jay Buntrock. Was the fact that the mech can't go underwater a slight nod to Charlemagne's movie Signs?
No, which is, again, it's so funny how, because I did a movie with Knight, but I never thought about that. That was actually something that was one of those things where I just made something up on the spot, because I had Gundog like slightly plotted, but like to the degree it's like, okay, they're on the run from the degree to which the book was plotted was like, okay, they're on the run from the aliens for a while. And they get into a bunch of tight scrapes that get out of them, and then eventually they find Mount Rushmore. But that's literally was it. So like I literally wrote them to a point where they were like literally backs against the wall with aliens closing, and I'm like, oh shit, I better figure out a way for them to get out of this. And so and this is, I don't know, sometimes it's not, you never want to, if you're like the magician, right, you never want to show the audience like how you do your tricks, especially if it turns out the trick is a bunch of bullshit. Because in this case, it was just, I literally just made it up. Like, oh, what if the mech can't go underwater?
Done.
Like, let's have them jump in the water, and and it's never explained. It's just that they just don't like it. For whatever reason, they don't go in the water, and so it was a way for me to give them an escape hatch when I needed them to have one.
I like
never
that
comes up again.
And well, I mean, who knows where this is going? This is
again, who knows?
Feels like there's a lot of setup here.
Right.
My question that I wanted to talk, and it's about all your bodies of work, really. My question that I've written is, you manage to use industry downtimes very efficiently. In the pandemic, it saw you take over the internet with Animal Talking. And now during the strikes, you're promoting your book. How do you do it?
I'm so glad you brought up Animal Talking, by the way. All the episodes are on my YouTube channel. For those who don't know, we did we built a replica of a classic kind of late night talk show set in the basement of my in-game house in the video game Animal Crossing, and started to pretend to do a talk show that we broadcast on Twitch, and it became so popular we ended up being like the biggest talk show of summer 2020, because all the other talk shows were dark. They couldn't open their sets during COVID. And so I ended up with Selena Gomez and Brie Larson and Danny Trejo and Gorillaz and T-Pain and all like A-list celebrities coming and like hanging out in my stupid Animal Crossing house, and people were going nuts for it. It was really, really fun. And that was just, again, it's interesting. I spend my whole life like trying to get these big serious projects uphill, and I'm like, oh, this one's really important to me, and like I always find a hard time getting them to like gain any traction. But it's the stupid idea. It's, oh, what if I did a talk show on Animal Crossing? Like a stupid idea Or what if we did Wordle but with dirty words? Like another stupid idea. Oh yeah, Sting. We had Sting on the show. Sting played live music on our show. That was mad. Thank you for reminding me that Sting was on the show. He's my friend, by the way. I got him to say that, and I have it on tape. I don't know. It's always maybe I should just like only do stupid stuff, because it's the really silly, dumb ideas that tend to capture people's imagination. And I think just the timing was fortuitous. Like we never would have got those actors. We never would have got those stars were they not all sat down because of the pandemic. And I don't think I would have got Shannon and Troy because it was actually done around the same time, were they not sat down during the pandemic. And, I don't think I would have had time to devote to this book and getting it finished and getting it out the door and some of the other projects I'm doing if I didn't have all this free time because of the strike. So, I think again, we talk about life finds a way, creativity finds a way. I guarantee you right now, many, many, many screenwriters who are unable to work in Hollywood because of the strike are working on their own personal projects, because creative people can't not create, right?
Yeah.
You can't just sit around and do nothing. You have to make things. Otherwise you're just going to die inside. And so it's been very gratifying to me in the middle of a strike where so many people can't promote the work that they've done, or they can't go off and create new work because it's all struck, and rightly so. The Hollywood needs to get its shit together to have something that is untouched by that, because books aren't affected, right? My own personal projects aren't affected. So it's actually been really, really, it's been invaluable to me to feel like I still can have a creative life even as this strike kind of drags into what is like fourth, fifth month, and we're all over it.
2 months for SAG, 4 months for the WGA, I believe.
Yeah.
But I have quite a few friends say the same thing. They're like, bet you really, really don't regret moving into books. And I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
How did I know? But like, I just think more people should be talking about books. And thank you so much for letting me talk about books for the last 90 minutes with you, Gary. For those that want a copy of Gundog, it is available right now. Head over to Amazon or wherever you buy your books and get it. If you want to listen to it, it is available where you get your podcasts. A little bit different. Don't look to your audiobook areas.
No, go
podcast.
You can't find it it is on Audible. It's just free.
Is that right?
It is on Audible. It's on pretty much we saturated it. And I've got to repeat this because my publisher asked me to say this every time. If you like the book, if you liked either the audio version, because it's the same thing, or the written version of the book, people ask me all the time, like, how can I support you as an author? What's the most useful thing that I can do? The most useful thing you can do, because my publisher keeps hammering this into me, is go to Amazon, go to Goodreads, and leave a rating on the book's page. Leave a short comment or review if you liked it, because that feeds the Amazon algorithm and helps them recommend the book to other people, and it helps other people discover the book. If you didn't like the book, keep your mouth shut. But if you did like it,
and don't tag, this is like something I've really got to tell the book communities, don't tag authors into reviews that you don't love it.
Oh, when are people going to figure that out?
Like, seriously, some
people, I had this happen to the other day, like somebody who doesn't like Rogue One said something about it, and then someone who thought they were defending me tagged me and going, oh, but Gary would have wrote that and it's great. So why would I want you to direct my attention to someone who doesn't like something that I worked on?
Yeah.
I get that you're trying to help, but you're not. Stop it.
Well, this will be better because Catch22, who did 22 subs earlier, actually slid into the document, because he is a Patreon backer, to ask the question, when you wrote the story for Rogue One, did you know it would become the best Star Wars film of the last 30 plus years? So there we go.
I will say this. I'm very, very gratified to see that of the Disney era, there's been 5 Disney movies made under the Star Wars name, and I think most people would agree they're a mixed bag, right? There's good, bad, and everything in between in the new movies. The fact that Rogue One has kind of emerged as, I think I'm right in saying, like the most broadly well liked of all of them. IGN did a poll and it was like 40%. It was a landslide. Is incredibly gratifying that people to have. I always get emotional when I talk about this, but I grew up with Star Wars, so to have contributed something, even in such a small way, because I was one of only 4 writers on the film, and then obviously thousands of other people that make it, to have contributed just like even a tiny piece to like that canon, which meant so much to me as a kid, and which then goes on to mean something for other people, like, to put a little brick in the wall of the Star Wars legacy and say I'm a part of that, was the greatest creative privilege in my life. Like, I could work in this business for 50 more years, and I don't think anything would ever end up like in front of Rogue One on my on my little bio.
Wow. There you go. I love that too. Thank you again for giving me your time. Please do support Gary and purchase that book. It is a really, really fun book. If you played Titanfall, you're going to love it. If you like Top Gun, you're going to love it. We're heading there anyway, guys. We're only a couple of 100 years behind this being a reality, so we may as well learn everything that we can.
One last thing, because we're talking about Rogue One. It's funny. Someone asked me the other day, do you think that Jyn Erso and Dakota Bregman have anything in common? And I never thought about it. I was like, oh my, they kind of do, right? Because they're both like these rebellious young women that like grew up kind of orphaned and like had to like learn to like fend for themselves. Like, oh shit, there's actually a lot of Jyn in Dakota. So if you like Rogue One, and I know many people do, you might also like this book.
Nicely said. I had plenty more questions, but I've taken enough of your time, and I really do appreciate that.
I have to learn to answer questions in a less kind of meandering on and on and on kind of way, because people have like 20 questions lined up. They get through like 4. They give these epically long answers.
I did have a couple more, but I tried to integrate as many as I could.
You did great. I'm not just blowing smoke. I've done a bunch of videos the past 2 weeks. You are by far my favorite one and the smartest person in terms of the questions that you asked about the book of any interview that I've done.
Oh, so that means a lot. Thank you. It's a great book. It's a lot of fun. And I do love the fact that you can binge a book, especially since the slogan of Maude's Book Club is let's read more books. This is a really good entry point if you want something that you can just absolutely enjoy and not put down and get back into the habit of reading books. Thank you again, Gary. I'll say goodbye and I'll raid on to the next one because we like to pass it on around here. But I won't keep you any longer. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Yay. That's that one. And then, no, I'm all over the place. Okay. Well, we're just gonna, no. Guys, did I mention that I have COVID? That'll get me out of any situation, I'm